The sound of his laughter cut deeper than any shrapnel I'd ever felt. Pretend? That's what they called you? My brother's words hung in the air between us, his face twisted in that familiar smirk. The same smirk he'd worn when we were kids, and he'd tell me I'd never amount to anything. 40 years later, sitting in his pristine suburban living room, nothing had changed. I felt my jaw clench, the dog tags burning against my chest under my flannel shirt. He had no idea what that call sign meant. No idea what I'd seen, what I'd done. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this. I sit on my porch most evenings now, watching the sun sink behind the pines. My little slice of Montana doesn't look anything like the deserts I once knew, and that's exactly why I bought it after discharge. The rocking chair creaks beneath me, keeping rhythm with my thoughts as they drift between now and then. 43 years since Vietnam, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. My coffee has gone cold in the mug that my granddaughter painted for me last Christmas. "World's Best Grandpa," in wobbly purple letters. If she only knew. If any of them knew. That's the thing about coming home from war. You bring back a version of yourself that doesn't quite fit anywhere. Too sharp around the edges for civilian life. Too haunted for family dinners and neighborhood barbecues. My brother's visit last month stirred things up. He found my old footlocker in the spare room while looking for extra blankets. Started asking questions about my service that I've spent decades deflecting. When he laughed at my call sign, something cracked open inside me. Old wounds, never properly healed, began to bleed again. The local VA center has a group that meets Tuesdays. Men like me, with memories like mine. I never wanted to be one of those old vets who can't stop talking about the war. Figured silence was dignity. But lately, I'm wondering if silence has just been another form of surrender. My hands aren't as steady as they once were. Arthritis knots my knuckles now. Hard to believe these same hands once assembled an M40 in complete darkness. Hard to believe what these hands have done, what they've been forced to do. The evening brings a chill, and with it, memories. Specific ones tonight. 1969. A rice paddy outside Bien Hoa. The weight of humidity and fear. And a man who didn't believe in me then, either. The wooden wind chime my late wife hung years ago tinkles softly, calling me back to the present. Tomorrow I'll make a decision about whether to attend that VA meeting. Tonight I'll sit with these ghosts a while longer. Some memories demand their due. The old trunk sat open at the foot of my bed, contents spilling out like old wounds. That's how it started. My brother rummaging through my past while staying for my granddaughter's high school graduation. A lifetime ago I'd carefully packed away those artifacts of war. Faded photographs, letters never sent, my service medals tucked into their cases. Most of all, I'd packed away the memories. "What's this?" he asked, holding up my battered metal canteen. The one with "Pretend" scratched into the side in careful block letters. It was the helicopter that did it. Earlier that morning, a medical chopper had flown over the house, heading toward the hospital in town. Just the distant thump, thump, thump of rotor blades. But it was enough. My coffee mug froze halfway to my lips, and suddenly I wasn't in Montana anymore. The sound transported me instantly. That distinctive rhythm. The beat of mechanical wings that once meant salvation or doom. My throat tightened as I was thrown back into the humid air of Vietnam. The scent of jet fuel and jungle rot filling my nostrils as vividly as if I were standing on that landing zone again, waiting for the Huey to descend through the mist. My hand trembled, coffee spilling over the rim. My daughter-in-law noticed, her eyes filling with concern, but she said nothing. They've learned not to mention these moments, these brief fugues, where I leave them and travel back across decades to places they can never understand. "Dad?" My son's voice, tentative. "You okay?" I nodded, set the mug down. "Just thinking about a promise I made a long time ago." "To who?" my granddaughter asked, still young enough for direct questions. "To whom?" my son corrected automatically. "To myself," I answered, and left it at that. But the truth was more complicated. The promise was to Lieutenant Wilson, to Captain Hernandez, to Private First Class Dawson, who never made it home, to men whose faces have blurred, but whose voices still speak to me in dreams. And most of all, to a young man I barely recognize now, the boy who went to war wearing my face, carrying my name, but who wasn't me. Not yet. When my brother found the canteen later that day, I knew the time had come to unpack more than just physical artifacts. Some stories need telling, if only to put them to rest. The base camp outside Da Nang hummed with the controlled chaos that defined military operations in Vietnam. It was 1969, and I'd been in country for exactly 17 days. The red dust had already worked its way into everything I owned. My boots, my gear, the creases of my skin. At night, I'd wash my face and watch the water turn rusty in the basin. Vietnam, marking me, claiming me. Our unit was tasked with reconnaissance and intelligence gathering, moving through villages and jungle terrain to locate enemy positions. I was the newest member, fresh-faced despite my efforts to appear seasoned. Staff Sergeant Jenkins ran our squad, a broad-shouldered man from Mississippi with a voice like gravel and eyes that had seen too much. "Williams," he called out during morning assembly, "you're on point with Martinez today." Martinez glanced my way, his expression unreadable. He'd been in country for 11 months, practically a lifetime. His lean face was permanently tanned, creased at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun. He nodded once, a minimal acknowledgement of our paired fate. "Don't get us killed, new meat," he muttered as we collected our gear. The humidity pressed down like a physical weight as we moved out. 5 men moving through terrain that shifted between dense vegetation and exposed flatlands. Every step measured, every sound catalogued. Martinez led with the ease of terrible experience, his body language communicating more than words ever could. Stop. Listen. Move. I followed his cues, trying to mirror his vigilance. Back at camp, the racial tensions that defined America had followed us to Vietnam. The other soldiers in my unit came from places I'd never been, spoke with accents I sometimes strained to understand. Thompson was from Detroit, his sharp humor a shield against the daily horror. Rodriguez carried photographs of his sisters in Los Angeles. Davis kept to himself, writing letters by flashlight that he never seemed to send. I was the only black man in our immediate squad, a fact that some pretended not to notice and others couldn't see past. Sergeant Jenkins fell into the first category, evaluating men on their performance rather than their skin color. Others weren't so evolved. "They send you boys over here thinking you're equal," Corporal Mitchell had sneered my third night in camp, his Georgia drawl thick with contempt. "But equal don't mean the same. Never will." I kept my expression neutral, my eyes forward. The military had taught me that much already. How to stand still while something inside me burned. How to wear silence like armor. "You got something to say, soldier?" he pressed, stepping closer. "No, sir," I replied, the formality deliberate since we both knew he wasn't my direct superior. "That's right," he smirked, "because you're just playing soldier. Pretending." The word lingered, a seed planted that would later grow into something neither of us could have predicted. That night, as I cleaned my rifle and prepared my gear for the next day's patrol, Martinez sat down beside me. His presence was unexpected. He generally kept to himself. "Mitchell's an asshole," he said without preamble. "But he's a useful asshole in a firefight. Remember that." I nodded, surprised by the gesture of solidarity. "How'd you end up here anyway?" he asked, lighting a cigarette with practiced flicks. "Same as most. Got drafted." "Yeah." He exhaled a plume of smoke. "Aren't we all just the luckiest sons of bitches?" Captain Reynolds arrived at base camp on a Tuesday, bringing with him new orders and a reputation for being hard but fair. The entire company stood at attention as he inspected us, his eyes missing nothing. Not the worn boot laces, not the slight variations in our regulation haircuts, not the fatigue that had settled into our postures after months in the field. "At ease," he finally said, his voice carrying across the assembled men. "I know you've been doing hard work out there. I've read the reports." A ripple of pride moved through us. Recognition was rare currency in Vietnam. "But the real work starts now," he continued. "Charlie's been moving supplies through this region, and it's our job to disrupt that flow. Effective immediately, we'll be running night operations into areas previously considered too high risk for engagement. I felt rather than saw the tension that gripped the men around me. Night ops were dangerous enough in familiar territory. In the areas he was describing, dense jungle, heavy enemy presence, they were potentially suicidal. As the briefing continued, I became aware of Corporal Mitchell's eyes on me, his mouth twisted in what might have been a smile. When Captain Reynolds finished and dismissed us, Mitchell made his way to my side. "Looks like you'll get to prove whether you're really a soldier or just pretending," he murmured, too low for others to hear. "My money's on you washing out after the first mission, if you survive it." His words crawled under my skin, burrowing deep. I'd felt the weight of such expectations my entire life, people waiting for me to fail, watching for the misstep that would confirm their prejudice. But here, failure meant more than embarrassment. It meant death, mine or my teammates. That afternoon, as we prepared our equipment for the night operation, Sergeant Jenkins called me aside. "Williams, you're on communications for tonight's mission. I want you handling the radio." I blinked in surprise. Radio operator was a position of responsibility, our lifeline back to base if things went sideways. "Yes, Sergeant," I replied, keeping my voice level despite my confusion. He must have read it in my face anyway. "You scored highest on the technical assessments during basic. That wasn't in your file by accident." "Corporal Mitchell usually handles comms," I said carefully. Jenkins's expression hardened slightly. "I'm aware of who usually does what in my squad, Private. Mitchell will be taking point tonight. You'll be on comms." He paused, then added, "Unless you don't think you can handle it." "I can handle it, Sergeant." He nodded once, decisively. "Good. Because out there, I don't care what color anyone is. I care about competence. Show me you're competent and we'll get along just fine." As he walked away, I caught Mitchell watching us, his expression dark with something more dangerous than mere dislike. I'd been given an opportunity that he considered rightfully his. In the pressure cooker of combat operations, such resentments could turn lethal. That night, as we moved silently through the jungle under a sliver of moon, I felt the radio's weight against my back like a target. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound had me tensing, my finger hovering near my rifle's trigger. The humidity wrapped around us like a living thing, clothes sticking to skin, breath coming in shallow pulls to minimize noise. Mitchell led us through the darkness, his movements sure despite the challenging terrain. Whatever else he might be, he was an experienced point man. Our mission was to locate a suspected supply route and gather intelligence on enemy movements. No engagement unless absolutely necessary. 3 hours into our patrol, everything changed with the sudden crack of gunfire. The crack of AK-47 fire shattered the night stillness. I dropped instinctively, pressing myself into the damp earth as bullets tore through the vegetation above us. Mitchell had triggered a hidden ambush position, or perhaps led us directly into it. There was no time to consider motivations. "Contact front!" Martinez's voice cut through the chaos, followed by the distinctive sound of his M16 returning fire. "Williams, radio!" Sergeant Jenkins shouted from somewhere to my left. "Call in our position." My training took over, hands moving automatically to operate the radio while keeping my body as small a target as possible. I relayed our coordinates, the nature of the contact, our status. "Requesting immediate support, over," I finished, the formal language a strange counterpoint to the life-and-death struggle happening around me. The radio crackled with acknowledgement as I set it aside and raised my rifle to provide covering fire. Through muzzle flashes and shadows, I could make out Jenkins directing Thompson and Rodriguez to the right flank. Martinez had worked his way left, attempting to circle behind the ambush position. Mitchell was nowhere to be seen. The firefight intensified, the enemy clearly determined to eliminate our patrol. Rounds impacted trees inches from my position, spraying bark and splinters. The smell of cordite and jungle rot filled my nostrils, mixed with the metallic tang of fear. Then I heard it, a sound distinct from the gunfire and shouting. A low moan from somewhere ahead and to the right. A human sound of pain. "Man down?" Thompson's voice confirmed what I'd already guessed. "Mitchell's hit." In the strobing light of muzzle flashes, I saw Mitchell's body sprawled in a small clearing, exposed, caught in the open during the initial moments of the ambush. From my position, I could tell he was still alive, his legs moving weakly as he tried to drag himself to cover. But he'd never make it on his own, not with the amount of fire being directed his way. I keyed the radio one last time. "Support ETA?" "10 minutes," came the response. Mitchell wouldn't last 10 seconds in his current position. I looked to Sergeant Jenkins, saw him assessing the same situation, knew what his order would be even before he gave it, and in that moment I realized I didn't need to be ordered. Not for this. "Covering fire!" I shouted, already moving. "I'm going for Mitchell!" Jenkins nodded once, then began directing suppressing fire to give me the seconds I needed. I discarded everything non-essential, keeping only my rifle and a first aid kit. Then I ran. Looking back, I don't remember the actual movement across that exposed ground. Just the sudden clarity that comes when life narrows to a single purpose. The bullets seemed to slow around me, their trajectories visible like tracer rounds in my mind's eye. I moved between them, a dance of desperate necessity, until I reached Mitchell's prone form. "I got you," I said, hooking my arms under his shoulders. "Hold on." He looked up at me, his face pale with shock and blood loss. Recognition flickered in his eyes, followed by confusion. "Williams?" he gasped. "Why?" "Shut up and help me help you," I grunted, beginning the agonizing process of dragging him back toward cover. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight in my arms as consciousness flickered in and out. My muscles screamed with the effort, but the alternative, leaving him exposed to die, wasn't an option I could live with. Not even for him. Especially not for him. We made it back to the tree line just as the promised air support arrived, the sudden thump, thump, thump of helicopter rotors drowning out the gunfire. Flares illuminated the jungle in harsh, shadowless light as I began assessing Mitchell's wounds. A through and through to the shoulder, a more worrying one to the abdomen. I applied pressure bandages, administered morphine from the field kit. "Why?" he asked again, his voice weak but insistent. "Why'd you come for me? After everything?" I met his gaze steadily as I worked, because that's what soldiers do. Something shifted in his expression then. A fracture in the edifice of his prejudice, small but unmistakable. He didn't speak again before the medevac arrived to transport him back to the field hospital, but his eyes said enough. When I rejoined the squad after Mitchell's evacuation, Sergeant Jenkins clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Good work, soldier." It was the first time anyone had called me that without a trace of irony or doubt, just a simple acknowledgement of truth. Later that night, as we regrouped at the base camp, Martinez handed me a canteen. With his combat knife, he carefully scratched the word "pretend" into its metal side. "That's you now," he said with the ghost of a smile. "The man who pretends bullets can't hit him." A lifetime of memories came flooding back as I sat at my brother's dining room table, turning the old canteen in my hands. I could almost feel the humid Vietnamese air again, the weight of equipment on my back, the constant vigilance that became as natural as breathing. "Pretend," my brother said again, rolling the word around like he was tasting it. "What kind of call sign is that? Sounds like an insult." "It was," I admitted. At first, the look of surprise on his face mirrored what I'd felt all those decades ago, when a word meant to demean became something else entirely. Something like respect. Something like brotherhood. "There are things I never told you," I said slowly. "Things I never told anyone who wasn't there." My brother leaned forward, curiosity overtaking his usual dismissive attitude. We'd never been close, not really. Different paths, different choices. He'd gone to college while I went to war. He built a career in finance while I pieced together a life from the fragments that remained after Vietnam. But in that moment, something shifted between us. An opening. A possibility. "I'm listening," he said simply. And so I told him about that night. About Mitchell and the ambush. About choices made in split seconds that define a lifetime. About what happened afterward when we returned to base and word of my actions spread through the company. 3 weeks later, I continued, we were visited by General Anderson. He was touring units, handing out commendations, the usual dog and pony show. Somehow, he'd heard about the night ambush. My brother's eyebrows raised. You got a medal? Not exactly, I said, a faint smile touching my lips at the memory. The general pulled me aside after the formal proceedings, asked me about my call sign. I remember standing at attention, sweat rolling down my back in the punishing heat as the two-star general studied me with piercing blue eyes. Private Williams, he said, his voice carrying the weight of command and something else, something like genuine curiosity. I've heard your men call you Pretend. Strange name for a soldier who's proven himself in combat. Yes, sir, I replied, offering no explanation. I've read the report of your actions 3 weeks ago, he continued. Doesn't sound like pretending to me. Sounds like the real thing. I remained silent, unsure what response he wanted. You know, he said, his tone shifting to something more conversational, when I was coming up through the ranks, they called me Professor. Meant it as an insult because I'd gone to college before enlisting. Thought I was too intellectual for combat. He smiled slightly. 3 Purple Hearts later, it didn't sound like an insult anymore. His eyes held mine steadily. Sometimes, Williams, the names that start as mockery become badges of honor. Wear yours proudly. What you did out there, saving a man who clearly didn't think much of you, that's what makes the difference between someone who wears the uniform and a true soldier. With that, he'd saluted me. A gesture of respect from a general to a private that violated protocol but conveyed something protocols couldn't express. That general, I told my brother, understood something that took me years to fully grasp. Sometimes, the very things people use to dismiss you become your greatest strength. My brother was quiet for a long moment, turning this over in his mind. Did Mitchell ever thank you? He finally asked. Thank me. I shook my head. Not in words. But 2 months later, when our patrol was pinned down by sniper fire, he risked his own neck to drag Martinez to safety. Actions speak louder. Outside my brother's window, I could see his grandchildren playing in the yard, their laughter carrying faintly through the glass. Children who would never know the things their grandfather and great-uncle had seen and done. Children who would grow up in a different America than the one that had sent me to Vietnam. You know, my brother said carefully, I never understood why you enlisted after your draft number came up. You could have found a way out. I could have helped. The old resentment flared briefly. His assumption that I needed rescuing, that his path was the only valid one. But age has a way of softening such edges. I needed to prove something, I said simply. To myself, more than anyone. And did you? Prove it? I considered the question seriously, thinking of all that had followed. The nightmares, the struggles to reintegrate, the marriages both failed and successful, the children raised, the life built piece by piece from the raw materials of survival. Yes, I said finally, but not what I thought I needed to prove when I left. The present reasserts itself as I return from these memories. My porch in Montana, the evening chill settling around my shoulders like an old friend. The canteen sits beside me on the small table, its scratched surface catching the last light of day. After my brother's visit last month, I've been thinking more about legacy, about what remains when we're gone. Not just medals or photographs or the stories we tell, but the invisible threads that connect one life to another. The ripple effects of choices made under fire, both literal and figurative. Mitchell and I never became friends, not really. Too much history, too many ingrained habits of thought. But something fundamental changed between us after that night. A baseline of respect that, while grudging at first, was nonetheless genuine. He died in 1998, according to the Veterans newsletter I still receive. Pancreatic cancer. I sent a card to his widow, received a brief note of thanks in return. She mentioned that he'd kept a photograph of our unit, that he'd spoken of Vietnam more in his final months than in all the years previous. I wonder sometimes what he told her. If my name came up, if Pretend was part of the stories he finally shared as the end approached. Captain Reynolds transferred to another unit in early 1970. I heard he stepped on a landmine near the Cambodian border. Sergeant Jenkins made it home. Started a construction business in Ohio. We exchanged Christmas cards, the message the same year after year. Still here. You? Martinez visits occasionally, making the drive from Colorado with his wife of 40 years. We fish, drink beer, talk about everything except what brought us together. Some bonds don't need constant reference to remain intact. The VA group meets tomorrow evening. I've decided I'll go, sit in the back, listen at first. Maybe speak if the moment feels right. After all these years, there might be value in sharing these stories with men who understand them without explanation. Men who carry their own versions of my scars, their own call signs earned in moments of extremity. My granddaughter calls my name from inside the house. Dinner is ready. I tuck the canteen into my pocket and rise from the rocker, my knees protesting the movement after so long seated. The ghosts retreat to their usual corners of my consciousness, not gone but temporarily at peace. Tomorrow is soon enough to face them properly. Tonight is for the living. The scent of hospital antiseptic never changes. Doesn't matter if it's a field hospital in Vietnam or the VA clinic in Missoula. That sharp chemical smell remains consistent across decades. Makes time feel permeable somehow, past and present overlapping in the corridors of my memory. I'm here for my regular checkup. Agent Orange left its marks on many of us who served. Diabetes, heart problems, cancers blooming decades after exposure. My health has held better than most, but vigilance becomes second nature when you've seen friends deteriorate from invisible poisons. Dr. Patel reviews my chart, her competent hands flipping through pages of medical history. Blood pressure's still running a bit high, Mr. Williams, she notes. Are you taking the medication regularly? Yes, ma'am, I reply, the formality ingrained. Every morning with breakfast. She looks up at me, dark eyes sharp behind fashionable glasses. And how are you sleeping? It's always the same question, asked with the same careful neutrality. Doctors at the VA know what ghosts haunt veterans' dreams, know the statistics on PTSD and suicide among men like me. They probe gently, watching for signs of deterioration. Some nights are better than others, I admit. The dreams still come. She nods, unsurprised. Have you considered the support group we discussed last time? Many veterans find it helpful to talk with others who understand. I think of the meeting I attended last week. The circle of chairs, the coffee in styrofoam cups, the men of different ages but similar expressions. I'd sat quietly, listening to their stories. Fallujah, Kandahar, places that came after my war but created the same broken spaces inside young men. I went, I tell her, just to observe. Something like approval flickers across her professional demeanor. That's a good first step. Is it? I'm not sure what I'm stepping toward or away from. At 73, I've lived most of my life carrying these memories alone, managing their weight through work and family, and the careful construction of routine. Speaking them aloud feels dangerous, as if they might multiply in the telling. Yet watching the younger veterans at that meeting, men my son's age, some barely older than my grandsons, I recognized something in their hunched shoulders, their vigilant eyes. Something I carry too, and for a moment I wondered if sharing my burden might somehow lighten theirs. My son wants me to record some of my experiences, I say unexpectedly. For the family archive, for history. Dr. Patel sets my chart aside, giving me her full attention. How do you feel about that? Complicated, I admit. Some things maybe shouldn't be preserved, and some things maybe shouldn't be lost, she counters gently. The words stay with me as I drive home, the Montana landscape unfolding around me in autumn splendor. My granddaughter's wedding is next month. She'll have children of her own someday, who will know me primarily through photographs and family stories. What version of me will they inherit? The silent veteran? The loving grandfather? The man who once carried a call sign that began as mockery and became something else entirely? The weight of Mitchell's body as I dragged him to safety. The look in his eyes afterward. The general's words. The canteen I still keep on my bookshelf. These things shaped me as surely as DNA shaped my physical form. Are they part of my legacy too? As I turn into my driveway, I make a decision. Tonight I'll call my son. I'll tell him I'm ready to start recording those stories. Not all of them, not the worst of them, but enough to pass something true to those who come after. When I reach my front door, the mail is stacked neatly on the side table where Mrs. Grayson from next door always leaves it when she collects it for me. Among the usual bills and flyers is a thick envelope with government markings. The Department of Veterans Affairs. My hands, spotted with age now, tremble slightly as I open it. Inside is a formal letter about a new program for Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange, along with forms for additional medical testing. They're still finding new connections, new diseases linked to that chemical rain that fell on us all those decades ago. The letter is impersonal, bureaucratic, but between the lines I read another message. The war isn't done with us yet. I set the letter aside and walk slowly to my study. The walls are lined with bookshelves, filled not just with books, but with the physical artifacts of my life after Vietnam. Family photos, my son's college diploma, my wife's collection of ceramic birds that I couldn't bear to part with after she passed, and tucked between two history books about wars that weren't mine, a small wooden box. I take it down carefully, feeling its weight in my hands before opening it. Inside, nestled in a square of faded green fabric, a piece of my old uniform, lies my Purple Heart. I received it after that night ambush, for wounds that left scars you can actually see. I run my finger over the profile of Washington, feeling the cool metal warm under my touch. The metal represents only a fraction of what we carried home from Vietnam. The visible wounds, the ones that could be named and measured and awarded. The invisible ones came later, the nightmares that had my wife shaking me awake, my body drenched in sweat. The way I couldn't stand to have my back to a door for years after coming home. The sudden rages that would rise from nowhere, sending my family scattering like birds until the storm passed. The alcohol I used to quiet the memories until I realized it was destroying what I had fought to come home to. They didn't give medals for surviving those battles. For the men who fought the war inside their own minds for decades after the guns fell silent. For the marriages that crumbled under the weight of the unspoken. For the sons and daughters who grew up walking on eggshells around fathers who carried jungles inside them. I place the Purple Heart back in its box and return it to the shelf. Then I reach higher, to where a dusty photo album sits largely untouched. Inside are the only photographs I have from Vietnam. Faded color snapshots of young men trying to smile through exhaustion. I flip through pages I've avoided for years, searching for one specific image. There, a group photo of our squad taken about a month after the ambush. Mitchell stands at one end, his arm in a sling. I'm at the other, separated by 4 other men but connected by something invisible to the camera's eye. I study his face, trying to see past the decades to the man who once held such power to wound me with his contempt. His expression is unreadable, neither friendly nor hostile. Just tired. We were all so tired. The album contains other ghosts too. Martinez with his ever-present cigarette. Thompson showing off a new tattoo. Rodriguez writing another letter home. Faces of men who never grew old, frozen in perpetual youth while I continued aging without them. The survivors carry dual burdens, our own memories and the unlived years of those who fell. Sometimes I wonder if they would recognize the old man I've become. Some wounds never fully heal. They become part of you, changing how you move through the world, how you relate to others, how you understand yourself. The racism I encountered in the military wasn't unique or surprising, just a battlefield version of what I'd known my entire life. What was unexpected was how combat created bridges across those divisions, forging connections that defied the prejudices we'd all been raised with. Not for everyone. Some men carried their hatred with them from jungle to jungle, unmoved by shared danger or common purpose. But for many of us, the experience revealed something essential about humanity. How artificial the boundaries we construct really are. How quickly they can dissolve when survival is at stake. Mitchell never apologized for his early treatment of me. Never directly acknowledged the transformation in our relationship. But after that night ambush, he stopped using boy when addressing me. Started meeting my eyes during conversations. Small changes that represented seismic shifts in his worldview. One night, months later, we found ourselves on guard duty together, sharing a foxhole at the perimeter of a temporary camp. The darkness wrapped around us like a blanket, broken only by the distant flash of artillery and the glow of his cigarette. "My daddy would skin me alive if he could see me now," Mitchell said suddenly, his voice low. I waited, sensing there was more. Sharing a hole with a colored man. He inhaled deeply, the ember brightening. "Trusting my life to you." I remained silent, understanding this was as close to a reckoning as we would ever have. "He was in the clan back home," Mitchell continued. "Made sure I knew exactly what he thought about your kind. Who was superior, who belonged where." The casual bigotry should have stung, but something in his tone, a detachment, an almost clinical quality, made me listen differently. "You know what I figured out, Williams?" He turned to look at me, his face half-shadow in the darkness. "All that stuff he put in my head. It don't mean a damn thing out here. Don't stop bullets. Don't heal wounds. Don't keep you alive when everything's going to hell." He flicked his cigarette into the darkness. "Don't make you a better soldier either. That's the real kick in the teeth." It wasn't friendship he was offering, not reconciliation or absolution. Just a hard truth, acknowledged man to man, that the hierarchies we construct crumble against the fundamental reality of our shared humanity, of our shared mortality. We sat in silence after that, the darkness a confessional booth around us. I thought about my own father, who'd taught me to keep my head down and my voice low around white folks, who'd instructed me in the complex choreography of survival in America. When to make eye contact, when to step aside, when to swallow pride to preserve life. His lessons had kept me alive, but they'd also kept me bound. "My old man told me to never trust white men in uniforms," I finally said. "Said they'd smile to your face while loading the gun." Mitchell gave a short, humorless laugh. "Smart man." "He was," I agreed. "But he never saw this place. Never saw what happens when the uniforms are all the same color, and the only thing that matters is keeping each other breathing." Mitchell nodded slowly. "That changes things." "Not everything," I said, "but enough." When I returned stateside, I discovered how little civilian America wanted to hear about Vietnam. The war had become divisive, shameful, something to move past rather than understand. But more than that, people didn't want to hear how the experience had complicated my relationship with race, how saving a racist's life had humanized him to me, and me to him, creating a messy truth that didn't fit neatly into any ideology. Black activists saw my military service as complicity in an imperialist system. White liberals wanted tales of oppression to confirm their worldview. Conservatives wanted patriotic simplicity. No one wanted the complex, contradictory truth that I had found moments of profound brotherhood with men who, in any other context, might have been my oppressors. I think about that night with Mitchell whenever racial tensions flare across America, about how our epiphanies came not through debate or policy, but through the raw experience of depending on each other for survival, about how change happens not in grand moments but in small revelations, accumulated over time like sediment forming stone. After my wife died, I found myself drawn to teaching. Started volunteering at the local high school, working with students struggling with history and English. Many were children of color, some from families facing hardships I recognized from my own childhood. I never talked about Vietnam directly, but I brought those lessons with me, about perseverance, about dignity in the face of prejudice, about finding common ground with unlikely allies. One student, Marcus, reminded me of myself at that age, bright, wary, carrying a defensiveness born of too many disappointments. He'd shut down whenever the white teachers tried to reach him. But something in my approach got through. Maybe he sensed that I understood the armor he wore, having fashioned my own piece by piece over decades. "How'd you get through it all, Mr. Williams?" he asked me once, after I'd shared a carefully edited version of growing up in the 1950s. "All that hate." I thought about Mitchell in that foxhole, about the general who recognized what my call sign had become, about all the complicated lessons of a life lived across America's racial divide. By recognizing that hate is taught, not born, I told him, which means it can be untaught too. Not easily, not quickly, but over time, with the right experiences, even the deepest prejudices can crack open. I think of that conversation often these days, as I watch America continue to struggle with its racial legacy, progress and backlash, steps forward and back. But I remember too how change happens, not all at once in grand gestures but person by person, moment by moment, as individual hearts and minds encounter realities that challenge their assumptions. The lesson of Vietnam wasn't what I expected to learn when I shipped out. Not about politics or power or even warfare itself. It was simpler and more profound. That beyond all our artificial divisions, we are bound by something deeper. Something that reveals itself most clearly in moments of extremity. That's what I want my grandchildren to understand. Not just the suffering or the heroism or the complicated politics of that distant war, but how it revealed, in flashes of terrible clarity, who we really are beneath the costumes of identity we wear. In my dreams, I still return to that jungle clearing, still feel the weight of Mitchell's body as I drag him to safety, still hear the crack of AK-47 fire and the shouts of my squad mates. The dreams aren't always nightmares anymore. Sometimes they're just memories, playing out with the strange logic of sleep. In the quiet afternoon of my Montana home, I take the old canteen from its shelf. The scratched word, pretend, has faded over the decades, but remains legible under my thumb. A reminder of a name I once carried, a person I once was, a bridge between past and present. Last week, I received a letter from Mitchell's son. He'd found my name among his father's effects after clearing out the last of his belongings from a storage unit. Apparently, Mitchell had kept a journal during his final years, documenting his Vietnam experiences as cancer claimed him inch by inch. Among the entries was a detailed account of that night ambush, of how a man he'd dismissed had risked everything to save him. "My father wasn't an easy man to know," his son wrote. "He carried old prejudices and hard opinions to the end, but he also carried your name and the story of what you did. It changed him, though he might not have shown it well." Enclosed with the letter was a small black and white photograph I'd never seen before. Mitchell and me standing side by side during a rare moment of downtime. Neither smiling exactly, but not glaring either. Just two exhausted young men caught in the same terrible story. On the back, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were the words, "Williams, Pretend, and me, 69. The photograph now sits framed on my desk, not out of sentimentality for Mitchell particularly, but as a testament to something I believe with increasing conviction as I age, that most hatred is born of distance, and most healing begins with proximity, with seeing clearly the humanity in those we've been taught to consider other. I wonder sometimes what might have happened if we'd met in different circumstances, Mitchell and me. If we'd encountered each other on a street in Georgia or at a lunch counter in Alabama rather than in the pressure cooker of war, would we have found that grudging respect, that recognition? Or would the structures of American society have kept us safely separated in our respective boxes, never forced to confront the artificial nature of the walls between us? I'll never know. But I do know that the bond forged in that jungle clearing, while not friendship in any conventional sense, was profoundly real, perhaps more honest than many friendships, because it emerged not from preference or pleasure, but from the stark revelation of our shared mortality. This morning my granddaughter called to tell me she's been accepted to law school. She wants to work in civil rights law, she says, to address the systemic inequalities that persist in America. I felt a surge of pride listening to her passionate plans. This young woman born into privileges I could barely imagine at her age. "What made you choose this path?" I asked her. "Honestly, Grandpa? Some of it was your stories. The things you've told me about what it was like growing up, about Vietnam, about how change really happens. It made me want to be part of that change." I hadn't realized she'd been listening so closely. Hadn't known my halting attempts to share pieces of my past had taken root in her heart, flowering into purpose. Tomorrow, my son will arrive with his video equipment. We'll sit in my study, surrounded by the artifacts of my life, and I'll begin the formal recording of my story. Not just for family archives, but for my granddaughter's understanding of the work that remains to be done. I'll tell her about Mitchell and the General, about call signs and foxholes, about the complicated truth of human connection across division. The sun slants through my window, catching on the dented metal surface of the old canteen. For a moment it flashes like a signal mirror, bright enough to be seen from a distance, bright enough to guide someone home. I run my fingers over the scratched letters once more, feeling the texture of a name that began as mockery and became something else entirely. A reminder that our identities are not fixed, but fluid, shaped by the choices we make in our most defining moments. Outside, the Montana wind stirs the pines, their whisper like distant voices calling across time. I close my eyes and listen, hearing not just the wind but echoes of all that has brought me to this moment. The roar of helicopter blades, the crack of rifle fire, the quiet solidarity of men bound by circumstance, the gentle questions of doctors and family trying to understand, the determined voice of my granddaughter claiming her purpose. All of it part of a single story, flowing like a river from then to now, carrying with it both the pain of what was lost and the promise of what might yet be found. If this story found you at the right moment, let me know where you're listening from. Sometimes sharing difficult memories helps carry the weight.